Hey everybody, and welcome back to the channel, and today we are talking about the VCT America's Last Chance Qualifiers. So the LCQ for all three VCT leagues gets started this weekend. We just concluded some of the Ascension tournaments. I believe at least one of them is still going on. And right now we're talking about the VCT America's LCQ, and I will be doing my pick'ems and predictions in this video for this tournament. Only one of these teams can make it to champions. There are going to be some pretty good teams that maybe deserve to be in champions that aren't going to be able to make it, but that's just the reality of the situation. You gotta win when you gotta win. And these teams did not do it either in the regular season or in the VCT Americas playoffs, so they sit here. And the first match that we're talking about is MIBR versus Crew Esports. So looking back to the regular season, these two teams were about the bottom of the barrel that you could get for teams in this region. Crew Esports not winning a single match, going 0-9 the entire regular season, obviously not making it to playoffs, while MIBR had a decent start to the season but fell off pretty quickly and ended up with a 3-6 record, taking 8th place, and again, also not making playoffs. So these two teams definitely, I think, underperformed. There are a lot of factors to why these teams didn't do as well as you maybe would have expected them to. Crew specifically was a very unlucky team. They're not exactly as horrible as their record would suggest. I believe they did win the most amount of close maps during the entire regular season, so they have the ability to win rounds and play a pretty close Valorant game, but they just don't have the ability to close out maps. At least they didn't in the regular season. And while the record is admittedly horrible, I refuse to believe a team with Klaus, Kesnet, and Nags can be this bad. So out of every team in VCT Americas, and maybe the entire VCT in general, this to me is the team that underperformed the most. But MIBR is also a decent team that, again, they had a good start. They have some good things going for them. They have some good talent, but I don't know if I see them really making much of an impact during the LCQ. But again, the same could be said about Crew Esports. So this is kind of a close one. MIBR did win matches. Crew was one of the teams that they beat during the regular season. They took that one 2-1. They also beat Energy and 100 Thieves, but they weren't able to string together wins to bring them to the playoff stage. But I think I'm going to go with, in my opinion, the fun pick, and I'm going to choose Crew Esports for this one. They have to win a match at some point, right? Like they just have to. This team was able to have some pretty good upset victories over some very talented teams over the years, and I refuse to believe they are as bad as a 0-9 record, but I guess we'll see. Again, I'm not going to be surprised if MIBR is able to take this match. They are a good team, but I am going to say that Crew, they've probably just been preparing and just stewing and I just hope they come back with just an absolute rage and beat MIBR and hopefully do at least decent in this LCQ. Next up, we have Sentinels versus 100 Thieves. This is a match that started off the VCT Americas regular season. Sentinels did take that one 2-1. And these are two teams in the Americas League that absolutely underperformed and did not reach expectations. Coming into this year, 100 Thieves was seen as this up-and-coming team with a lot of really good young players. They did decent at Champions. They didn't make it to the playoff stage of Champions, but they had a good run in the group stage. They just ran into a very good Fnatic team. They did beat them that one time, though. But after losing their coach, Sean Garris, they just have not looked the same. I guess he had a very big impact on that team and just was very good at strategy and knowing where to put these players. And the new coaching staff just hasn't been able to get the same amount of quality out of them, but I still think they have a lot of talent and, again, underperformed. While Sentinels, I think what happened to them is they were a kind of mismatched group of very talented players. It's hard to argue that their roster doesn't have some really good talent on it. First off, you have Tens, who I know people will say that Tens sucks now and he isn't the same player he was before. I still think Tens can get to that same level of quality that he was at during Iceland Reykjavik back in 2021. We just haven't been able to see it yet. Zekken is a fantastic player, and he was their best player throughout the entire regular season, at least in my opinion. Marved, now being the IGL, which is a bit iffy. I don't think you want Marved on IGL. Not to say that he's a bad one. I think he did a decent job when he took over that role, but I don't think it's something that you really want him to be doing. I think he's much better as a good controller role player. Pancada, Sassy, really good Brazilian players. Again, this is a good roster. I think it just wasn't a good mash of them. It was more like, let's get these really big names in Valorant and create this super team and then see how it goes, and it just didn't work. And I don't know if it's going to continue to work, but 100 Thieves was one of the teams that they beat. These two teams had the exact same record during the regular season, both going 4-5. Maps for Sentinels was 10-12. Maps for 100 Thieves was 10-13. Rounds for Sentinels was 223 to 255 for -32, while 100 Thieves 242 to 269 for -27. Sentinels was technically above them in the standings, but it's the same amount of wins, so it's not that big of a difference. And again, this is a pretty close one that I struggle to decide on who I really think takes this, but I'm going to say that Sentinels does end up taking it. I think they have more talent just overall. I think 100 Thieves, man, I want them to win this one, honestly, because I don't see the Sentinels roster staying together, and I think that the 100 Thieves roster can do really well, but it just they haven't found it yet, at least not since Sean Garrett's leaving. I think if they can kind of recapture that kind of magic they had during that 2022 season after the roster rebuild, I think we can see some really exciting Valorant from 100 Thieves, but I don't know if I see it at this moment. And then we have Crew versus Furia Esports. So during the regular season, Furia obviously won this one because Crew did not win a single match. They took that one 2-0. That was Crew's first match of this season. Furia, I think, is much better than Crew. Furia has some really good players, some really good talent. Digizin was an amazing player down the stretch for Furia. He was playing some very, very good Jet. He was one of the best Jets in the entire VCT Americas, I would say, at the very least. And they have a pretty good, deep roster. I just don't know if they have the overall like explosive talent aside from Digizin to really go super far in this league. But I do think that they're better than Crow. Furia takes that one. Probably a 2-0, maybe a 2-1. We'll see. Next up, an interesting matchup, Cloud9 versus Sentinels. So during the regular season, when these two teams met, Cloud9 did take this one 2-0. This was after Marv joined the roster for Sentinels, and then they lost to Loud, but then won to MIBR, so it looked like maybe things are getting better for this team. And then they run into Cloud9, who at the time was the best in the Americas. They did end their season with an 8-1 record, but then had a terrible playoffs and did not do very well. But they did beat Sentinels during the regular season 2-0, and then that kind of spelled the end for Sentinels' playoff hopes. I know their loss against Evil Geniuses was technically the end of that, but, you know, that loss was a pretty devastating one. They could not afford to lose any games after that loss to Loud. Cloud9, I just think, is better. I think Cloud9, while they haven't been able to show up for big games, and that's kind of been their problem throughout their history. But we should not forget that this team did have an 8-1 record during the regular season. Their maps were 17-4. Their rounds were 253 to 183 for +70, which was the best round differential in the entire VCT Americas. Again, during the playoffs, they did not perform very well. They lost 2-0 to Cloud9. They did beat Leviathan 2-1, so it was a little sketchy. And then they did lose to Energy in a 2-1. So they weren't super bad after losing to EG, but that was a very embarrassing loss to EG. I know EG, ended up going to grand finals of Tokyo. Congratulations to them, by the way. But Cloud9 absolutely fumbled the bag there. They did not put up as much of a fight as I thought they were going to. So that was disappointing. And this team has kind of shown in their history that they can't really show up for big games. Aside from Zelsis is an absolute clutch player in these big moments, but a lot of the roster just hasn't been able to do the same. But I'm thinking it does change here. I do think Cloud9 can take this match, and I think that they will. Next up, Leviathan versus Furia. This is a Latin American team versus a Brazilian team yet again. And this one is a little bit tough for me. Leviathan, I do think, is a very talented team. They looked pretty good during the regular season. They didn't end up going far in playoffs. They did lose both of their playoff matches, one of them to Fury, actually in a 2-1, and then they lost to Cloud9. But they have some good talent in Taco Illa, Kane, NZR, Mazzino, Shy. These are good players that can take a team far. They had a pretty good showing at Champions last year, decent showing at Lock-In, but Furia has seemed to be a thorn in this team's side for at least the start of the regular season. They lost to them 2-1 both times. They only won one map in the second match in overtime. Both these teams did have the same exact record during the regular season, both 4-5. For maps for Leviathan, it was 11-11. Rounds was 237 to 223 with a round differential of +14. Furia 4 and 5 as well, 11 to 12 maps, 252 to 260 for -8. So statistically, at least based off of just those stats, Leviathan is the better team, but Furia has found a way to beat them both times. So does Leviathan adapt and learn how to beat this team? I think they absolutely can, but I actually do like Furia's chances pretty good in these LCQ. I think they're a pretty talented team. I like Leviathan too, but I'm going to go with Furia. Now going to the lower bracket, Sentinels versus Leviathan. This is a pretty interesting match. During the regular season, Leviathan did take this one 2-1, handing them their second loss of the regular season. They didn't blow them out or anything. Again, it was 2-1. The first map was 12-14. The second map was 13-11 in favor of Sentinels. And then Pearl was 4-13. Decent performance on the first two maps, especially the one that they won in Ascent, but losing that badly on Pearl is pretty bad. While there's been plenty of time for Sentinels to build chemistry with each other, to learn how to play with one another well, I just think Leviathan just has a better head start on them with that. They've had pretty good chemistry throughout the season and in previous years. I'm going to go with Leviathan on this one. And that is where Sentinel season ends, and then we probably see a roster rebuild. Would not be surprised if that happens. And then going to the upper final of the bracket, we have Furia versus Cloud9. When these two teams met in the regular season, Cloud9 did take this one 2-0. They played on Ascent and Fracture, winning Ascent 13-8 and then Fracture 13-9, so keeping this team to under 10 round wins during that match. But that was a time where Cloud9 was really starting to get on a roll. That was their third win in a row. And this is kind of around the time where they legitimized themselves and showed that they weren't just a flash in the pan kind of team. And for Furia, the opposite was happening, and they were kind of starting to stumble a little bit. So I think this match does end up being pretty close. I think both teams have a lot of talent. I think both teams have a very good star player. Cloud9 has Leaf, who statistically was the second best player during the regular season in the entire VCT Americas. But as I mentioned before, Digizin is an absolute stud. Watching him play against Sentinels, he was just running over that team at points during that match. So I do kind of struggle with this one. The fact that they 2-0'd them, it was the first time that these two teams have played to my knowledge. So I do kind of want to give Furia the benefit of the doubt. And I think I'm going to do that. I'm going to go with Furia on this one. They go to grand final for the LCQ. And then we have Cloud9 versus Leviathan. When these two teams met in the regular season, Leviathan did lose that one 2-0 to Cloud9. And then they met again in the playoffs, and Cloud9 took that one 2-0. In that match, Cloud9 won 13-8 on Haven, then Lotus. Leviathan took that 10-13, and then Ascent was 13-4 in favor of Cloud9. So pretty close there. So Leviathan, getting swept by them during the regular season, but, at least took a map off of them this time, but still weren't able to overcome them. I do think the same thing happens again, and Cloud9 does end up pushing and winning that one. Which means that our grand final is a rematch of the upper final, Furia versus Cloud9 again. I am going to choose Cloud9 for this one. Now, it's not just a North American thing. I've seen those comments before. I'm going to stop pointing them out, honestly, because I really don't care that much. But I will explain myself for this one. Cloud9, 8-1 record, didn't do very well during the playoffs. We know that. And they do tend to choke in big games. But do keep in mind that this team started the regular season with two brand new players in Jake and Rooney, and they did very well. Now they have the experience of playing in big games in the playoffs. Then easy breezy time during the regular season, and then they got to matches that really mattered, and then that's where they started to falter. But now they have that experience. Now these players know what they're going into, and I think that Cloud9 can absolutely take the LCQ and make their return to champions. Would I be entirely surprised if Furia takes it? No. I think they're a really solid team, and I think they have some really good talent, as I talked about before, and they have the ability to beat Cloud9, as I put in the upper final. But I do think Cloud9, being the second best team during the regular season, I think they can find that level of quality again in these playoffs, in this LCQ tournament, and I think that they can make it. So those are my pick'ems and predictions for the VCT America's Last Chance Qualifiers. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below, and tell me your own predictions. It's going to be a very interesting tournament. Sorry about the infrequency of uploads. I've had a very busy last couple weeks. I'm going on vacation next week, so I won't be able to watch most of the LCQ, unfortunately. Anyways, thank you guys for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed watching this video, and I'll see you guys later. Bye!